All right, next we're going to talk about our printing our second layer. So I'm going to mix up ink for my second layer, but before I do, I just wanted to kind of go over the steps that I've taken so far. So last time I printed the first layer, and I printed a couple different variants to it, but this is probably the one from the video. So it's this kind of orange color. I also wanted to try doing a light purple, but you'll see that I had some issues with the purple. So this was a little bit too dark and also a little bit salty on there too. So I tried mixing more of that ink extender, hoping to make it more transparent so that I could make it lighter. But this was the result of making that lighter color. So you'll see it almost looks like it's salty. And I think what's actually happening is that when you add too much of that ink extender, it starts kind of breaking down the pigment a little bit. So the alternative to that would be to add white instead of the ink extender, but white didn't come in our Speedball kit. So I just, for the sake of troubleshooting, I did print some using white mixed in with the purple to get that layer that I wanted. But so in order to alleviate that issue, I think it's better to just use our lighter colors. So yellow specifically will help get that first layer nice and light. So I used a lot of yellow and just a little bit of red. And I also did mix some of that extender base into it so that it would dry a little bit slower and make it just a little bit transparent. I just didn't use a whole lot of the ink extender for it. So after I printed this layer here, I went back and carved, and I've got another video showing the areas that I carved. But essentially what you're going to do is you're just going to look at that first print and say, what do I want to keep that light orange color? And then carve any areas that you want to keep that light orange away. So just like the first step, it was just carving out what we want to keep, the white of the paper. This step was just carving out the stuff that we're going to keep the light orange color. So you'll notice for mine, I have like kind of a frame around here and then this flat circle in the background. And then because I wanted to keep the skull, the bones, as light as I possibly could, so I did carve out quite a bit from the skull too on mine. You'll notice like trying to keep the value well, so like around the nasal cavity, there's like just a couple little white highlights around it. And this time I wanted to still keep some light areas there. So I carved just a little bit more into the nasal cavity so that it'll start light and kind of get darker as it goes in. So think about your values, shadows, and things like that. Another thing is like this clover leaf on top of the eye. Initially, I only carved out the white veins as the highlight. This time I went through and I just made some vertical hatching marks through there to keep that a little bit lighter, so that light orange color. You'll notice that the clovers on the other side are kind of in shadow and they're a little bit darker. So I just left those alone. I didn't carve those out at all. So those will be the last two darker layers there. So another thing is like the teeth. The teeth are pretty much white and I wanted to keep it really light value. Initially, I left some orange hatches that go through there. And this time I've carved those out so that the teeth will stay nice and bright and light as well. So those are some of the steps that I took for it. But now we're going to start mixing our next color. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do kind of a like a medium red, maybe adding just a little bit of blue to make it kind of purpley. And I'm also going to show you how to do a blend roll, also known as a rainbow roll. So to start off, mostly red, so about a toothpaste amount of red. Just the smallest, tiniest bit of blue. The blue is going to make it go dark very, very fast, so you don't want to add too much to it. I'm going to do just a little bit of yellow to keep it light. And then also about a toothpaste amount of the extender to keep it as transparent as possible, and then also to make sure that it doesn't dry too quickly. So I've got all my colors here. I'm going to move this blue. I'm just going to take a tiny little itty bitty bit of the blue and mix that in, because like I said, it'll go dark fast from that blue. And I think that's pretty good. Alternatively, if I wanted to keep it monochromatic, you know, the first color that I did was orange. So if I was keeping it totally monochromatic, similar to those chiaroscuro prints that I showed online, then I would actually just take an orange, so mixing the red and yellow together, and then mix that with just a tiny bit of black to just make it a darker orange. It would start turning kind of a brown color. But I wanted to make this less monochromatic and more analogous. So instead of doing a dark orange, I'm going to do a red that's kind of that medium mid-tone red instead. And like I said, I also want to do a bit of a blend. So I'm going to take some of this ink and move it over to the side and then just add like a little bit more blue to it to make a slightly darker version. You can see it turns dark so fast from adding that blue. So try to keep your mixing minimal, so you don't go too dark too fast. The main thing is making sure that this is darker than the first layer that we printed, but also not so dark that it's going to blend with our final black layer. So I've got kind of a lighter red and a darker red here now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw down some ink for my ink slab. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of that darker ink and then put it on the other side. And then when I go to roll up, normally I'll go back and forth for a while and then I'll turn sideways and go the other way too. But this time I want to keep a separation between these two colors. So I'm only going to go in this one direction. And the colors are really, really similar. So it's going to be a very subtle blend. You might not even really be able to notice. And I'm going a little bit extra than I normally do, because normally I'll switch and go the other way. But because I'm trying to keep these colors separate, you can kind of go back and forth a little bit too to help that blend, so there's not like such a strict line straight down the middle. Okay, so that's my color ready to go. I'm just gonna move this to the side. So if you look at my brayer, you can kind of tell that it's a little bit lighter on this side, a little bit darker on the other. I'm going to look at my block, and I'm going to say, if this is the ground, the light's probably shining from this side. So I want to keep the light value up top and the darker value down at the bottom. So light value on top, dark value at the bottom. Now when I ink it up, first before I forget, I'm going to put my little piece of tape here to protect this area from getting any ink on it. I'll also move this to a scrap sheet of paper. Oh yeah, and if you're not sure about the color too, don't forget you can do a draw down. So take a little bit of that ink and put it down on a separate sheet of paper. See how that looks. And also compare it to your print so that they're not too similar to each other. Okay, so keeping the light side on top and the dark side down at the bottom, I'm going to start inking up my block. Now my brayer is a little bit not as wide as the block is, so I do have to kind of shift around a little bit. It would be the most convenient if your brayer was actually wider than your block is, but we got to work with what we've got. The tricky thing with this, again, is that you have to keep it in just one direction, because if I started changing directions, that'll mess up my blend. A little bit low on ink, so I'm going to recharge. The brayer a little bit. Go back over. And then hold it up and check it in the light, see where that glisten is, see if you've missed any spots. I can see some lap marks here, so I want to kind of fix that up. But next we'll go into printing.